Welcome back to Mastering Change.
Today, we'd like to think about how it's not just the person in crisis who needs help, but really the entire family system.
In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Louise Stanger, a trauma-informed clinician and interventionist known for her work in addiction, grief, and complex family dynamics.
Louise shares how healing often begins before a single session takes place, by preparing the family, listening to their stories, and meeting them where they are.
We talk about why interventions should be invitational, not confrontational, and how spiritual connection can play a meaningful role in recovery.
Let's get started.
Dr. Louise, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. I always think to be able to speak across the pond is such a blessing and makes our world so synergistic. So thank you.
Hi, Louise. It's a pleasure to see you again. So, as most of our listeners will know, we start our podcasts with a card game that I've picked out a selection of cards here, and on each card there is a prompt. And the idea is that it prompts you to tell some sort of story, because the stories are bridges to connection. So it's a way of kind of breaking the ice and for you to connect with us and to connect with our listeners. So I shall just pick, I've got no idea what these cards are. I'm just going to pick the top one and I read it to you. Okay, so the first card says, my therapist probably thinks I'm ...
Oh, my therapist probably thinks I'm really creative, is certainly eccentric, and really enjoy working with him.
Brilliant. So, Louise, do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of your background and your work that you do in the field of trauma, mental health, and well-being?
Oh my God. So I've been around a long time. I'm 78 years old. My first degree, I finished my undergraduate at a very young age. I went on to San Diego, what was then San Diego State College, and received my master's in social work. And at that time, I had been in undergraduate school at the University of Pittsburgh. I had these wonderful professors. You would love them. They were Mellon professors, which means they were either from Australia or London. And I was an English lit major. So the beauty that they did was they pencil whipped me, because they taught me how to write a topic sentence paragraph, which really helped later. My minor was sociology, and I was always really interested in social action, social services. And so when I graduated the University of Pittsburgh, I thought this was a time in history in America where Martin Luther King had been very popular. He had just been killed. I had marched with Martin. It was a time for women becoming women. There was a song called Helen Reddy, Women Hear Me Roar. We marched, and it was very much of a time of civil rights, and that you could be anything you wanted to be. And I thought when I moved to San Diego, I was going to get an immediate job with the Urban League, but they didn't want any cute little girl working for them at the time. And so I was supposed to be a lawyer, but my initials as a kid spelled law, but I didn't know where the law school was. So I found myself taking graduate record exams at San Diego State School of Social Work. And I was so grateful, because this was a brand new school. It was super, super exciting. The professors were just astronomical, and they combined the art of narrative, I believe, with the art of learning how to navigate people. And storytelling was very much part of that. So my master's thesis, for example, was a study of authenticity. And I was able to string poetry. But I guess your question is, well, tell me about yourself and tell me about your trauma. I was born on a fault line of trauma. I experienced over 6 sudden deaths in my lifetime. My first one, of course, was my father. who I thought was Superman. I was sure he was. He was bright, cheery, always laughing. And I remember being carried on his shoulders, sadly died by suicide of a brain disease. And when I was in the 3rd grade. And that was very challenging because of the way I learned it. In those days, nobody wanted to talk about death or dying. And I was skipping on a playground. In my first book that I wrote, it's called Falling Up. Little Ruthie Ann comes skipping over to me, and she says to me, "Do you know how your father died?" Well, of course I did, but was I going to tell her that he was Superman and had been taken out by kryptonite? Because that's what I thought. No one told me. And she came skipping over and she said, "Well, I know how your father died." I go, "Okay." And they said, "He hung himself with a tie." That was my introduction to a traumatic experience, so to speak. And during my lifetime, I was very lucky in the respect that there was people around me that were full of resiliency, and also a lot of social workers. Armenta, I know you're a social worker too. I was sent away to camp. I was sent away to Camp Wood Echo, where Mr. Leland Rubenstein and his wife owned it. And I could shoot archery, I shoot rifles, I rode a horse. But anyhow, the world was safe. And somehow or other, I was okay because my world wasn't okay. I have a very interesting life history. My 3rd child died of SIDS death. My first husband died suddenly and unexpectedly after biking 60 miles, and he was in great shape the day after Easter. But I was lucky, and I say lucky in that I always had a mentor along the way to help me process. And I was given academic opportunities to also write about these things. My dissertation, I let me stop. I was always famous in the alcohol and other drug field. I have over $5 million of NIH and IAAA grants in that arena. But remember, I got my master's when I was 20, and I got to teach in a school of social work. And I didn't go back to get my doctoral degree till much later, till the world sort of changed and I had all these grants and everything. And when I went and did my doctoral degree, I really wanted to write about or explore women and men who were widowed at a young age. Why? Because I had been a 3rd generation widow. It wasn't just my father had died. My grandfather died giving a political speech the summer before I was born. Obviously it was my mother's husband that died, and then my first husband died suddenly and unexpectedly when I had 3 children. So the topic just fascinated me. And I was able to use a research methodology developed by Dr. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot out of Harvard, which is a qualitative research, which is really the art and science portraiture, which I use today in everything. And from that, I interviewed people all over the world. I wrote portraits of people, had a lot of rejected, say, in publications. But my daughter and I created a website called widowsource.com. And again, I'm going to put it back in perspective. It talked about widows and where they did, how they lived, did they date, did they do anything? And lo and behold, 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, nobody had any knowledge at all except quantitative data. Like if you're a widow, you lose money. That wasn't what they needed. And so Columbia School of Social Work hired these reporters. They found my website. And from there, I was able to work with the widows of 9/11. I think I probably answered 12 questions in one from that thing, but life is very much a hiccup and messy.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, the combination of lived experience and, academic and practitioner experience.
I want to know a little bit more about the research methodology that you use, this kind of idea of portraiture, because you spoke a little bit about the narrative kind of way of learning or writing or, doing your first dissertation back in undergrad school. And then I wonder like how it all links and if you can explain a little bit about that.
I think I was always a good listener and I always wanted to hear your story. When I was going to do my dissertation, I fell in love with a Harvard researcher by the name of Dr. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. She is, I believe, African American, Indian, and was very unique in terms of the level she had at Harvard. But she and an artist had written a book called The Art and Science of Portraiture. And what she said was, it was a qualitative research, like, tell me about yourself, tell me why your heart's hurting, just basically your 5 basic questions that you would create yourself. But what happens as the researcher or as the clinician, you're not this cold, objective person. You're there. You're witness to the pain. You're the collaborator with it. You're the storyteller as well. And so you join into the narrative. I find the process incredibly synergistic, incredibly enlightening, not just for me as a researcher or me as a clinician, but for people. From doing those portraits, I developed a sort of schema called family mapping, which every client I work with, I interview individually and I do family maps. And I might do them with many. So I have no idea who I'm pulling out right now, but a family map is not your ordinary genogram. So I can't even go over this right now, but you interview everybody. It's really exciting. In the textbook I wrote, which is called The Definitive Guide to Addiction Intervention, which was commissioned by Rutledge, you can see a nice, pretty family map. But it's a wonderful way to allow people to tell the story in a very different way than if you were doing a genogram.
So you're able to use both the research methodology you learn at university. Obviously, you've taken that now into using it therapeutically as well in a way that works, which I think is really fascinating. And I'm not sure how many other research kind of techniques have been used in that way, but I think it's really really interesting. And what does a client? So if I was your client and you were going to do a family map with me, would you need to interview everyone in my family, or would
Well,
I? Yeah, go on.
It depends. It depends. If you were, for example, in a perfect world, say you called me up and you were worried about your son, I'm making this up, and he was the one that you thought was acting out, I'd say, okay, well, he would be what we call the ILO or the identified loved one. But I'd say, hey, let's do a family map because I need to learn everything about it. He might be the center stage person, but I would ask who else is really important to him. So I would absolutely positively interview you and everybody else. But in doing so, the primary people would probably take between 70 or 90 minutes. And what you're getting is, in one respect, is a retrospective biopsychosocial. So you can do it in family group. But right now, for example, I'm working with a wonderful woman who maybe she's 50 and she's the only one that I'm working with. She grew up in a family beset with substance abuse and mental health and trauma. And she is having a very, very hard time grieving the death of her brother who died from alcoholism. And in doing her family map, and I'm not interviewing anybody else, it gives her a picture of how she saw the world. It gives her it's not a picture of how she was actually an ACA. Her parents had alcohol and mental health problems. It gives her a picture to see how she's navigating with her 2 daughters now and her husband, and how this grief, which is now all encompassing for her, she can let go, and how she can come to some realization that she did the best she could do. But I can get that from a family map, but you have to dance around that and let her pick where she's ready for.
In a way, the wheel's like almost the kind of Pictionary / narrative or kind of literary way, or like scribing way of almost doing something like psychodrama. So you have, with the psychodrama, you act out the family sometimes, and then with this, it feels like you're kind of I might be completely off, but it feels like you
Well,
kind of.
no, I mean, I know how to do psychodrama and everything, but we're not doing sculpting. Like, you're not standing up, putting people like that. No, this is a little bit more eclectic, more open-ended. Maybe I could give you an example, and I've done them in family meetings, but let's just say, I'll take Mark. Mark was a nice little freckle, really cute. He looked like he could be on the cover of a cereal box. And he was in behavioral health care treatment for, I don't know, shooting up a 7-Eleven. So it was really, his family was definitely, had a history of alcoholism or mental health. Several sisters, he had 3 sisters, they did experience depression. What was most interesting in this family was mom. Mom was beautiful. She looked just like you, beautiful blonde hair, really bright, just dressed to perfect. And when we talked about her, I asked her, tell me about your family. And she had a brother. And her brother died at a very young age, I would say in his 20s. And the myth was he had a heart attack. Okay. Well, and meanwhile, this is being done live. I mean, on a big board, because you can do the one on the big board. All of a sudden, mom started to cry, and her tears cascaded down her head. And again, you're not doing this to judge. You're not doing it any way like that. But what happened was, she finally, in that moment when we were in this room with a lot of other families, she finally was able to say, my brother didn't have a heart attack. He died of HIV. And that was during a time when there was a lot of shame. Well, the young man sitting in his chair started bouncing up and down like this. And he said, wait, I've got to talk. Now, you've got to understand, when you're doing these live, you want to make sure that you hold that in advance. Well, what really came out was this young man, who actually is doing so great today. I'm so happy for him. He did have to go to jail for a while, but he was questioning his own sexuality. And having mom say that gave him the opportunity, which you would never get in a regular session, to say, hey, and this was all done, offline, so to speak. So I think that's pretty beautiful in the narrative way. I mean, I remember another young woman who was, she was really beautiful, but if you identified her as the IOL, she had an eating disorder, she had substance abuse, she had trauma, she had mental health. Mom and dad, and yet, because I was working in a treatment center at the time, and she knew that if someone died, you mark an X like on the map. She said, I don't want to mark an X. And I said, well, what would you like to do? She said, I want to make a halo. And I go, okay, you can make a halo on someone who who's deceased. It's her younger brother was deceased, and he was about 21 or 24. She was about in her 30s. She has been a record executive. She was doing really well. Dad was very successful. He had a history of substance abuse, and mom was completely closed off. She was a big caretaker. We are doing this family map live. And what came out of it is something that really therapeutically you have to unpack, but you have to be very gentle with. Well, what happened is this brother had nothing wrong with him, but he had died in a parking lot. He had sort of fallen to his death. And what came out was this perfect young man fell to his death because of a drug deal gone bad. So you can imagine when you're doing that and you don't know where you're going, but you know that you've got to hold that, but you also know that in some ways can free this
Absolutely.
young woman with a lot of work and also the whole family. Mother had a really hard time with that afterwards. I can't say I have a lot of experience as a hospital social worker, but she developed Guillain-Barré. So it took her a really long time to get well.
Guillain-Barré.
Guillain-Barré is a disease of ascending paralysis. I don't know. I was a young social worker. Nobody knows how it happens. If you've ever read the book Catch-22, you know that the author developed Guillain-Barré. It can come and it can disappear, but it's totally debilitating.
Is it an autoimmune thing?
You know what? They still don't know. So for me to say it could be autoimmune, but it appears and then it disappears.
You feel like it's related to trauma?
Yes,
It's,
I think it's related a lot to trauma. I don't have any good evidence, but it was really like, it was able to free her. And then they could speak openly and grieve about this little, remember, they put a halo on top of this person who died. But really, and it gave this took months afterwards, but this was all mapped out. You have to know that you can't go all into all this right now, but now you have this picture and it's rich data. So I don't think, I'm not a psychodramatist, but that doesn't get that much out. You could get out the anger and you could do the, scarves and everything, but that can't get out this initial blueprint, because this gives you a blueprint of where you may want to go and where you may need to stay away from,
And absolutely. And also with psychodrama, and just generally speaking, you're not with your family members there doing it either, which I think is a really powerful and quite scary way of doing therapy. I can really see how impactful it can be, but I think it's definitely freeing as well when you're able to sort of say something in a session like that you've kept hidden, and all of these things that are those secrets, they not only make you sick, but they also make the rest of the family sick, don't they? So yeah, I think it's really an interesting technique or tool to use, actually. And do you use it, so in terms of from the grief work that you do and the work that you do with widows, do you use family mapping in that with those clients as well, or not so much?
Well, with those clients, when I was doing the dissertation, I interviewed them in a very qualitative way, and I did use the family map. I said, tell me about, what happened in your family. Let me draw it out. Tell me what happened to your spouse. And there were so many notable findings. Like, for example, I have a lot of personal experience with sudden death. So that is very different. When I was interviewing someone, and it took me a while, the first time I interviewed a woman, oh, she was delightful. She used to call herself a payer lady. And you want to know what a payer lady is well, her husband was very wealthy and they used to go out together. But after he died, she only was invited out if she paid, like for charity and everything. But when I first started interviewing her, it was if he was dead, but he wasn't dead. He had a debilitating like Parkinson's disease, but yet the person did not see them as alive. And with Alzheimer's, with anything such as that, that was really unique for me as an interviewer, because I understand sudden death. You're here today, gone tomorrow, and you have while the world is topsy-turvy, there is no one there that's present with someone who has Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, which is probably one of the cruelest diseases of women, people that I interviewed. They're there, and yet they're not there. They're no longer the same. So in that respect, but yes, I did that. But what I came up with are portraits of women and also the resiliency. In each case, there was something that happened that they found newfound freedoms. And like I can remember one right now off the cuff. Mary Hughes, when I was doing my dissertation, was president of the University of San Diego. And she was just this beautiful white-haired woman, sort of looked like Barbara Bush at the time. I don't know. Or she would look like Queen Elizabeth. She was very stately and everything. And she had come to the University of San Diego, which is a small private Catholic university, from Parks University, nautical. So she was brilliant in nautical. And I was allowed to interview her as one of my subjects for my dissertation. And one of the things that she told me, two things. One, she said that she never would have become president of the university had her husband not died, because she spent so much time learning how to write and learning how to do different things. That was her freedom. But then she also remarked about this wonderful thing that happened, which really is so picturesque. She was invited with her mother, who was also a widow, when they were at Park University, to dinner with all these Navy wives. And the Navy wives were big, and they had a very fine repast, a lot of heavy meats, a lot of everything. And they were really full, and grog they were drinking. So they were really busy. And after this dinner was over, the ladies pulled their chairs back and they said, "Okay, are you ready?" And Mary didn't know what they would be ready for. And all of a sudden, they turn the TV on. They all get up and they all dance to Jack LaLanne, and they do exercises. And, she was like, how can you even she was wondering to herself, well, how can you even do exercises when I've just ate all of this? And what she realized, and then what they said to her was, our husbands never let us dance. And that was their newfound freedom.
I don't know if I told you, there's a story where I live in Wales. There's a house which we bought that's just next door to this house. So it's a little bungalow. And Ida and Pat and Ida used to live in that house, and they've never separated from each other ever in they married each other at sort of 17 and 18. They were 17 and 18 when they got married. They'd never spent a night apart other than in the war. They spent time apart when he went to war, and that was it. Other than that, they've been together every single day of their lives. And they lived in this little bungalow on top of a hill in Wales. Very sweet, did everything together. And they were vegetarian all of their lives, and since I've lived here for 30 odd years, and they were always vegetarian. And then one day they were quite old, 80 something, and Ida, the woman, the lady, died. And obviously we were very worried about Pat because we didn't know, like, how is he going to, he's never been alone since the war, you know, he doesn't know how to cook for himself. He doesn't know how to look after himself. So my mum kind of went up and checked on him every day to check he was all right. Anyway, one day she goes up to his little cottage, she knocks on the door and she's like, I can smell bacon. And there he is. There's Pat. And he's literally just the massive fry up. Look at all the meat that he could possibly ever eat. And he was like, and he ate all of this meat and he was like, I'm not going to be a vegetarian anymore. And he lasted maybe 3 or 4 months on his own, eating all his meat. And then he killed himself. He didn't want to live anymore without either, you know. So he had the freedom. He ate the meat, and then he was like, I'm done now. My life's I've done. I don't need any more. I just needed to try a bit of meat. That was
That is really, that's true. But everyone finds some sort of new freedom, which you know, and that doesn't mean they didn't love the person, and some people, wait a minute, but some people did not love them. Okay, they were really glad. You know, there's a myth that everybody lost the love of their life. That is not true. But then there were so many interesting findings, like spirituality. You know, people, when I did this dissertation, I worked alongside of the UCSD, because they had a widowhood project, very famous widowhood project, which was designed just to give Valium out to people. But Shukett and Shukter were very nice, and they helped mentor me. In fact, they interviewed me as a widow for this project as well. But one of the things that you know, we learned is there's also, you know, people are not crazy, and depression is not pathological. And a lot of people, if you listen to them, you would really think they were hallucinating. Like one woman painted a big chakra of something. Other people, they would go in the room and the clock would be stuck at 11:11, or they would swear they put something here and then it was moved over here, and like little tricks. And, you know, in the beginning, you say, okay, well, that's just your mind. But who is to say, you know, if something is impossible? You know, even my mind, my first husband died way over 32 years ago or 33 years ago. And he owned a hot air balloon. He owned the first hot air balloon in San Diego. I just recently, 3.5 years ago, and he bicycled everywhere. And I just recently moved back to an area where there are gorgeous hot air balloons flying. But I remember the first day I came, and this is a strange setting where I'm living now. And lo and behold, because there was this blue and white striped hot air balloon over me. And usually balloons now are really gorgeous because we had a very blue. I said, oh, I guess you came to say hi. I'm doing okay. Thanks. You know, and I don't want you it's, and so I think the other thing that it did was it normed for people you know, you don't have a mental health crisis. You know, depression can be one thing, but some things are normative. And then a whole lot of wonderful research about kids. What do you do with kids? And you know, do you date? What happens? Oh, there's a man in the house. Well, how does that feel? And of course, I had the privilege of working with the New York Fire Department and the widows of 9/11. And these were ordinary women who were thrust into public eye. And of course, 9/11, nobody knew what to do. And there was a lot of critique because the firemen didn't always go home to their wives. They went home to the wives of the fallen ones and ended up living and marrying with them. And, you know, there was a lot of bad press given to these women, that they got so much money. None of it was true. And so I think that part of working with portraiture, that part of learning, gave a great deal of empathy, a great deal of like, understanding, and a great deal of ability to talk about areas that people didn't want to talk about.
And I think so many people today are so. I had this conversation on an earlier podcast around we're so used to curating a picture that we put out there for others. What I'm hearing you describe is a more of an inward, true reflection, and it's going to offer you insights through the process of actually creating the narrative and the visual reference. Yeah, I can definitely see how it's a way of joining or understanding how the dots are joined in your own head, so you can try and make sense of that inner reality versus the external portrayal of that reality that so many people curate these days. It's not always a true reflection of their authentic selves, because we've kind of lived in a society and systems with expectations that maybe don't match our innermost reality or desires or appetite for what we want for ourselves. So does it ever turn into excuse me, does it ever turn into a visual expression more than words and shapes on a page? Does it ever get more abstract, more illustrative, more
You mean from the women? I've had people draw pictures of chakras. I had one woman, she had an oil painting, it was fascinating. It looked like a beautiful young girl, maybe Medusa, with a snake. Beautiful oil painting, expensive oil painting. And while I was sitting in her house, the lights flickered on and off above this painting. And the painting was a very surreal. I mean, I still have a slide somewhere of it. And she looked and she said, "Oh, that's him." And the lights were flickering on and off when she was in, I believe, Oregon or somewhere. The lights flickered off and on when he died. But she also had highly visible dreams where after he died, tigers would come and play and they would dance and frolic, and then they would disappear and she would know she was okay. So those kinds of visual types of representations are definitely there. And you could have, if you were doing long term, you could have your client draw what they thought, and have that visual kind of thing, because the data is so rich,
hmm.
and data belongs to really the client, so that you allow them to express.
Amazing. I'm going to ask you, Louise, I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to ask you the question that we ask all of our podcast guests, and that is, we live in a world of increasing fear and anxiety and doubt, whether you look at the macro picture, political unrest, climate concerns. There is a lot for people to deal with. If there was a single lever of change that you could pull that would affect the kind of change that we need to see in the world, what would that be?
Oh my God, that's such a hard question. I don't know if I can answer it, but I'm going to tell you the metamorphosis. I'm just going to personalize it, and I'm going to tell you the metamorphosis for myself. I turned 78 this year. And obviously I love to write. So that's a mode of expression. And I think I also like music, lyrical music and everything. And I just finished a new book that just came out 2 weeks ago that's been in all the newspapers, so I'm pretty excited. It's called Reflections on Aging from the Sunset Marquee. And what it is how I personally, or how I might work with someone, is able to overcome adversity. Overcome it. First of all, we've got to listen to people and be in connection. If you ask me, the single most thing we've got to do is be in connection, be open, and listen to each other's hearts, because all our hearts are different. I once won an award, and I quoted Philip Roth from Courtney's complaint because he asks, "How are you?" and "Does anybody really care how you are?" And at the same time, I read a article from the head of Duke's Islamic Studies, and he asked, "How is your Hayel?" And they both were asking, "How are you? Do you really want to know?" And so I think it's really important to find out how you are. At this stage of my life, I think I think trauma is transformative. I think it's possible to be resilient. I think it's possible to let the music in. I let the music in, be active, take care of yourself, whatever that means, however you can do it. Reflect, take a look at what's happened, explore, talk about the tough stuff. And certainly being a widow and sudden death and grief and loss and is tough stuff. The world, all about it is talk about this tough stuff. But then the other key I give to people is put your big girl panties on. If you stay wallowing in self-pity, like the Cartman Triangle, you all know what the Cartman Triangle is. If you stay there, you get to be like T.S. Eliot's J. Alfred Prufrock, walk the people come and go as they speak of Michelangelo. But you've got to have that courage, and you need connection and mentors to help you do that. And then you have to be able, after you've grieved your losses, after you've taken a look, after you act out in connection, be willing to celebrate, be willing to join up, be willing to be in a group, or however you can do it, and lead a life well lived. I guess I'm the old one that goes one person at a time. I can't tell you, our world is a very unhappy place where people don't like each other because of colors of skin, because of voice intonations, maybe even colors of hair. But yet I think if we can be in connection with one another, that's, to me, connection has always been the key to recovery.
Been a real pleasure speaking to you, and a nice, enlightening, heartening end to my day. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And hey, look, I want you all to keep doing what you're doing, keep inspiring change because you do it so well. And each one of you, I guess the question I would have you ask all your people is, what is your blueprint for success? What is your blueprint for connection? Because we can spend too much time wallowing in the weeds. And I guess I'm just in that thing like, what is it? What action are you doing? How are you being of service? How are you doing stuff?
That's a lovely question, and one that I definitely think that all of our listeners could think about answering, because it gives you, if you answer that question, if you journal that question, it gives you some sort of roadmap, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Louise. It's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to see you again, and we'll see you later. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.